If it were you, your very first day at work, what would you be ready to witness? A death? A soul crying for help? Or a silence you'll never forget for the rest of your life? This isn't my story. This is the story of my younger sister, Lena Cross. It was 2017, a freezing winter in Minnesota. Lena had just started her final clinical rotation before graduation. She was excited, just like any other senior nursing student. New uniform, a shiny name badge, and eyes full of trust in the path ahead. That morning, I remember it vividly. She texted me from the bus. "First day, hope nobody dies today, huh?" I laughed, because at the time both of us thought it was just a joke. But there are days when fate doesn't have a sense of humor. Lena was assigned to intern at Hollow Pines, an old nursing home tucked away deep in the pine forest. Not too crowded, not too modern, but a place where many students came to learn how to say goodbye to people with compassion. Only, no one told Lena that the first person she would care for would die right in front of her, and the second one would whisper for help before vanishing without a trace. The story I'm about to tell has no blood, no screaming, just two dying women, and a young student caught between the boundary of knowledge and the things no classroom ever prepared her for. And then, right there in room 303, Lena discovered, not everyone who dies truly leaves. Some stay behind just to be heard. Let's go back to that morning. The very first time Lena stepped into the cold, dim hallway of Hollow Pines, not knowing she was about to face one of the experiences that would change her life forever. We'll begin with room 217, where Mrs. Eleanor is waiting for a goodbye no one had the chance to say. Stick around and watch till the end. Trust me, the best part is coming, and I truly believe this video will hit you right in the heart. If you feel something, if this video means something to you, please comment number 1 to let me know. And if it's not quite your thing, that's okay too. Just drop a like to help me improve next time. Thank you for being here. The main hallway of Hollow Pines was long and narrow, carpeted in pale beige and dimly lit by tired fluorescent bulbs. The air inside carried that unmistakable scent anyone who's ever stepped into a nursing home would instantly recognize. A strange mixture of antiseptic, painkillers, and time slowly running out. Lena walked slowly. Each step seemed to sink slightly into the thick carpet, not because it was soft, but because of the weight of an unnamed fear. She was assigned to shadow a group of other nursing students under the guidance of a clinical instructor named Ms. Randall, a woman known for her strictness, clinical skill, and a demeanor as cold as the stainless steel doors of the sterilization room. Lena's first case was in room 217, where an 88-year-old woman was dying, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. No family, no one to say goodbye, no tears, only the sound of the heart monitor slowing, like a soft tapping from the other side of life. Lena stood still. She had never seen anyone die before, and no one had ever taught her how to stay silent when death was drawing near. And then, Ms. Randall stepped forward. No whisper, no hand on the patient's shoulder. She spoke, but not to Mrs. Eleanor. She spoke to the group of students pressed up against the wall. "We're observing the final stage. Heart rate dropping below 30, shallow breathing, extremities cold. No more pupillary response. Next will be Cheney-Stokes respiration." Lena felt rooted to the floor, but what made her throat tighten wasn't the physiology lesson. It was Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, once barely open, now slowly widening. The old woman looked straight at Lena. No more haze, no more fatigue. That gaze seemed to scream, "I'm still here. I hear everything." Lena trembled. She swallowed hard, but she stayed where she was, because she didn't know what else to do. Just a few seconds later, Mrs. Eleanor began to breathe faster, as if trying to call out the name of someone she hadn't had the chance to say goodbye to. Then a strange sound came from her throat, thick, wet, choking. A sound medicine calls the death rattle. The rattling breath caused by fluid collecting in the airway when the body is no longer strong enough to cough. "And this is the moment. We're about to witness cardiac arrest," Ms. Randall continued coldly. But Lena couldn't hear her instructor anymore. She could only see those eyes, wide open, not closing. And then, the monitor let out one long, continuous beep. Mrs. Eleanor was dead. No one cried. No one called her name. Only her eyes, still locked on Lena, as if leaving behind a question she would never find the answer to. After the nurse came to pronounce the death, the students left the room. Lena was the last to step out, but before she crossed the doorway, she turned back. The light from the window fell directly across Mrs. Eleanor's face. Those eyes were still open. The first death Lena ever witnessed had no blood, no panic, only the eyes of someone who knew she was about to be forgotten. And Lena, she could never forget those eyes. She didn't know. Just a few hours later, in another room, another woman would hold her hand and whisper a cry for help that Lena would hear in her mind for years to come. Come with me to room 303, where Lena met the second one. Someone who didn't die right away, but never really left that room either. No one taught Lena what to do after witnessing someone take their final breath. There was no chapter in the textbook titled, "What to do with the eyes that won't close on the first dead person you meet." In theory, it's just a neurological reflex. When the autonomic nervous system shuts down, the eyelids no longer have the strength to stay shut. But in reality, those eyes kept following her down the hallway. They stayed imprinted on the inside of her eyelids every time she blinked. And that night, when Lena lay down on her dorm bed, those eyes appeared in the mirror. No screaming, no blood, just a pair of aged, wide-open, silent eyes, as if whispering something she couldn't quite hear. Lena told me later, "I don't know why I was that scared. I wasn't scared of her. I was scared of the feeling that I'd done something wrong, or more precisely, that I hadn't done anything at all." And that's exactly what so few people dare to say about death. It doesn't end with the long, flat beep of a heart monitor. It ends with a feeling left behind in the one who witnessed it, a small slip in the conscience that no one can ever wipe clean. Lena began to question herself. Why didn't Ms. Randall whisper something warm before Mrs. Eleanor closed her eyes? Why did that moment have to become a cold, clinical lesson? And why didn't anyone in the group of students feel anything at all? Some might call it medical discipline. But Lena was still human. And humans can't stay calm when death is still staring back at them. She couldn't sleep. From 2 a.m. onward, Lena sat upright, staring out her window, the streetlight casting shadows across the ceiling. The dark corner where the curtain didn't fully close looked exactly like the corner of Mrs. Eleanor's bed. She tried to remember the last thing the woman had wanted to say, if there had been anything. But all she could recall was that gaze, wide open, so vivid it almost sounded like it was trying to speak. The next morning, Lena walked into her new clinical shift carrying a heavy silence. She avoided Ms. Randall's eyes, and even the glances of her fellow group members. But fate didn't let her stay on the sidelines for long. Her name came up again on the assignment list. Lena moved to room 303. Room 303 was at the end of the west hallway, a place rarely assigned to students. The door was dark gray, the wooden nameplate faded and chipped, with a small crack right beside the handle. The air around it felt heavier, a little more humid, as if it were holding onto the breath of someone who hadn't fully left. Lena walked slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Not out of fear, but because her instincts told her something was waiting behind that door. She knocked lightly. No response. Pushing the door open, she saw an elderly woman lying on her right side, back facing the door, blanket pulled up to her chest, left arm dangling off the edge of the bed. The sign above the bed read, Belle Marjorie, 87 years old, lung metastasis, final stage. Lena stepped closer. Just as she touched that thin, frail hand to take a pulse, the woman slowly turned and opened her eyes. They weren't dull or vacant like those often seen in the dying. They were eyes that knew exactly what was coming, as if she had been waiting for Lena all along. "Help me," she whispered, very softly but clearly. Lena froze. She tilted her head. "Ma'am, what do you need?" No answer, just those 3 words, repeated. "Help me. Help me." Each time weaker, but still distinct. Like a final prayer, not a call for a doctor, not a plea for painkillers, but more like a dying confession only Lena could hear. Lena sat down on the edge of the bed, holding Mrs. Marjorie's hand. That hand was cold in an unusual way. Not the cold of someone fading, but the cold of early rainwater, the kind that soaks into your bloodstream the moment it touches your skin. She squeezed gently, thinking the woman needed comfort. But the woman didn't let go. On the contrary, she held on tighter, as if Lena was the last thread keeping her tethered to the living world. Lena began to feel slightly short of breath, not because of the patient, but because of the sensation of being pulled under, drawn into something deeper. Mrs. Marjorie's eyes never left hers. Unblinking, not panicked, just a gaze sinking slowly into the dark. "Help me!" The fifth time. Still the same voice, but this time Lena felt it echo inside her, not from the woman's throat. In that moment, time felt like it stopped. No footsteps in the hallway, no beeping from the monitors, no sound at all, just her whisper, and Lena's heartbeat pounding out of rhythm. She stood up, meaning to call the nurse, but Mrs. Marjorie still held her hand, and for the first time, she said something longer. "Don't leave me behind." That voice wasn't from someone suffering in her body. It was from a soul that knew it was about to be forgotten. Lena froze. Her hand let go very slowly. She left the room without saying a word. It took exactly 3 minutes. When she returned, the room was empty. No Mrs. Marjorie, no chart, no blanket. The bed was smooth, like no one had ever laid there. She went down to ask the front desk staff. "Room 303? There's no patient assigned there. We haven't used that room since last week." Lena looked up, down the hallway. No one. No laughter, no footsteps. Only the echo of something that had just slipped through her fingers and left behind nothing, except 3 words. "Help me. Help me." She stood there for a long time, her hands still cold, her eyes still not blinking, afraid that when she opened them, she would find the woman standing right behind her. In the 3 minutes Lena stepped out of room 303, the world seemed to erase every trace of Mrs. Marjorie Bell. No one knew who she was. No one remembered any patient being there. Everything, from the bedsheet to the chart to the nameplate above the bed, was completely gone. Lena began to doubt herself. Did I imagine it? Did anyone else hear her? Maybe I was just too tired. But the coldness of that hand, the eyes that already knew the end, and that voice repeating those 3 words were too real. No kind of imagination makes your arms tremble for the rest of the afternoon. She decided to tell the story to an older nurse named Elaine, known as the Keeper of Memories at Hollow Pines. Lena asked softly, "Have you ever heard anyone say something about room 303? Elaine looked up from her teacup, her eyes fixed. "I thought that room was locked. No one's been in there since 2009. Lena was speechless. That was the year listed on Mrs. Marjorie Bell's death certificate. "There was a girl who once reported something," Elaine continued. "She was a nursing student too, but no one believed her. They said it was just trauma. A few days later, she asked for a transfer. In medicine, they call it secondary trauma. The indirect emotional injury when a healthcare worker or student witnesses or absorbs pain that hasn't yet been named. It's not like PTSD. There's no need for explosions or blood, just a single sentence, a glance, or the grip of a hand that feels like ice. Lena began to feel like she was becoming part of something bigger. Not just a witness, but the one who carries the final echoes of those who had been forgotten in this place. Back at the dorm, Lena didn't eat dinner. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it was the surface of murky water. And there, she heard the whisper again. Not from outside the room, but from inside her own mind. "Don't leave me behind." There's something strange about cries for help that go unanswered. They don't disappear. They stay. Inside us. In those who once heard. And in the hallways that were never fully lit. The next day, Lena returned to room 303. She opened the door very slowly, her hand resting on the freezing metal handle. Inside, empty. but not empty in the usual way. Empty in the way that makes you feel something once lived here deeply and only just left. As she turned to leave, Lena saw something on the floor, a small brass nameplate, old, scratched, and on it, faded, were 3 letters, M. Bell. No one believed her when she told the story. No one explained why the nameplate was there, but Lena knew, and from that moment on, she no longer believed that every death was complete. Lena held the nameplate in her hand throughout the entire shift. The scratches on the brass couldn't blur the 3 letters tied to the voice she couldn't forget. M. Bell. She gave it to the evening nurse, who glanced at it, frowned, and shook her head. No one by that name is on the current list. Probably an old tag. That answer. Too neat. Too easy. And it was that ease that made Lena want to find the truth. That afternoon, after her shift, Lena asked for permission to enter the records room, where old patient files were stored, handwritten notes from decades past. The room was in the basement. The smell of damp paper, moldy wood, and time itself hung in the air like an invisible curtain surrounding her. She started by year, working backward from 2009. Each old folder was tied with thin twine, the pages yellowed, the handwriting shaky. Lena's eyes moved down the list of names until she froze. Bell, Marjorie A., room 303, date of death, November 17th, 2009. Lena sat down. Her hands went cold, not from the basement air, but because that file didn't exist in the hospital's digital system. It didn't exist in the modern records, but she was holding it in her hands. Real paper, real ink, and a real whisper. She turned to the final page. The nurse's notes from the last shift, written in blue pen, slanted to the right, as if scribbled in a rush. Patient was alert but kept repeating one sentence, "Help me." Vitals dropped between 03:13, 03:17 a.m. Flatline confirmed. Time of death, 03:17. The exact time Lena had jolted awake from a nightmare the night she left room 303. It no longer felt like a coincidence. It was a repetition. Exact. Minute by minute. Word for word. And Lena had no more doubt. This wasn't a ghost. This was a tear in time, left open, unhealed. She dug deeper. The more she searched, the more signs she found, hidden away. Another female patient, 2012, died in the same room, with a note left behind. Repeated muttering, unable to decipher. A case from 2015, a nursing student dropped out mid-rotation after hearing a voice call out from an empty room. None of it appeared in the official database, only remained on paper, old, silent. Lena wrote down every name, every time of death, every repeating detail, and she began to see a pattern. Every 3-4 years, there was a woman who wasn't heard, repeating the same plea, but none of them were entered into the digital records. Not a single case flagged as unusual, just quietly, made to disappear. She suddenly understood. What haunted her wasn't a specific spirit. It was the legacy of being forgotten, a chain of deaths no one dared to remember. They didn't really want to be saved. They just didn't want to disappear. That sentence kept repeating in Lena's mind. And from that moment on, Lena was no longer just someone who listened. She became the keeper of the final call. With handwritten notes from the records room, the forgotten names, and the word "help me" still echoing in her chest, Lena began to piece everything together. From Marjorie Bell, 2009, to Catherine Holt, 2012, then Amanda Lynn, 2015. Each had their own year, their own story, but all shared 3 identical things. Room 303. A voice repeating in the middle of the night, and a time of death, always between 3:15 and 3:17 a.m. She wrote everything down in a small notebook, as if, without doing so, those voices might start to slip from her memory, one syllable at a time. Lena told only one person she trusted, Ms. Elaine, an older nurse who had worked at Hollow Pines since the 1990s. Elaine wasn't surprised. She just stayed quiet, then shared something she had never included in any official report. There was one night I was on shift alone. Room 303 was empty, but the nurse call button kept going off every 3 minutes. I'd go in to check, no one there. But there was always something else. The bedsheet rumpled, exactly where someone used to lie, and the heart monitor lit up, even though no one was hooked in. Elaine said the last part in a near whisper. It's not the dead repeating themselves. It's the things we missed, coming back, asking to be heard. Lena started waking up every morning at 3:17 without an alarm. She didn't hear voices, but in the bathroom mirror, each time she looked at herself, she could feel she wasn't standing alone. No visions, no ghostly phenomena, just the absolute sense that she was carrying something that belonged to someone else. This phenomenon, in psychiatric medicine, is known as deep empathic imprinting. It happens when someone comes too close to another's overwhelming fear or despair and unconsciously carries that feeling with them. Lena didn't run. She did the opposite. She began searching for a pattern. She called a former student named Danielle, who had dropped out mid-program in 2016 after a clinical rotation at Hollow Pines. Danielle interrupted the moment she heard room 303. I heard someone whisper behind me, but there was no one in the room. I didn't dare turn around. I think, once you've heard it, you're forever the one who carries that voice. 3 people, 3 generations of students, 1 room, and 1 message, repeating, not fading with time. Lena wrote in her notebook, repetition is how lonely souls try to keep their memories from vanishing. Not to be saved, but to be remembered. And then, she made a decision. Something no nursing student had done before, or dared to do alone. Lena would return to room 303 at 3:17 a.m., not to challenge it, not to convince anyone else, but simply to listen. Fully. One last time. Lena had planned to record that night, but at the last minute, she left her phone outside the door. Not because she feared interference, not because of any residency policy, but because some things aren't meant to be recorded, only heard with the heart. The clock read 3:14 a.m. She stood in front of room 303, where so many hands had once rested, one final time. She opened the door. No wind, no footsteps, just a silence so deep it felt like the whole building was holding its breath. Lena didn't turn on the light. She simply sat beside the empty bed, the place where, once, a hand had reached out and grabbed hers. 3:15, 3:16. She closed her eyes, focused on each beat of her heart, and then it came. Help me! The whisper came from no mouth, no recorder. It rang directly inside the mind, in the same voice, same tone, same volume, as those she had heard from the departed. But this time, it didn't stop at 3 words. Help me. Remember. Lena opened her eyes. The room was still dark, but something, not quite human, lingered in the air. She wasn't afraid. She knew. This was no longer a plea for help. This was a memory not yet returned. In medical terms, it's known as empathetic haunting, when the unresolved emotions of the dead cling to the one living soul who truly listened. Not possession, but the gifting of memory, so that you can live on for them. She heard breathing, rapid, weak, broken, like each person who had ever lain there, struggling to say something before their heart gave out. And what made Lena tremble wasn't the sound. It was the strange sensation rising in her chest, as though she were the one about to die. Her heartbeat slowed, her hands grew cold, her vision began to blur, and a phantom beep echoed from deep inside her left side. Then, after a few seconds, everything stopped. No sound, no shape, no feeling. Only a deep, hollow emptiness, as if she had touched the edge of life and something, not yet understood. When she awoke, Lena found herself lying neatly on the floor. No one had called for help. No one had noticed. Just a small handwritten note taped to the edge of the bed. If someone remembers me, then I never truly left. She took that note with her, taped it to the final page of her notebook, and closed the book, not to end something, but to begin listening to other whispers from other places. That was the moment Lena decided to leave Hollow Pines, not out of fear, but because she believed other homes, other rooms, still held voices in silence, waiting for someone to finally answer. May. Lena transferred to Whitley Grove, a small nursing home in the neighboring state, once an old monastery, later repurposed into a long-term care center for elders with memory loss. No one there knew about Hollow Pines, and she didn't tell. The Whitley building looked like it had been cut from an old painting. Faded yellow hallways, towering Gothic ceilings, stained glass windows that cast blurry light in the late afternoon. And then, there was something strange. A room at the end of Hall E, without a number. Just a gray-painted door, no nameplate, no treatment schedule, always locked, but no external lock visible. When Lena asked, the head nurse simply smiled and deflected. "That's the old equipment room, nothing to worry about." Yet during every night shift, Lena saw a faint light glowing from under the door, even though no one ever seemed to enter or leave. One day, while reviewing archived medical records, Lena found something unusual. Hall E was listed as having 15 rooms, from E01 to E15, but the floor plan clearly showed a room E16, the final door at the end of the hallway. And strangest of all, E16 had been crossed out in red ink, replaced with a handwritten note, not in use since 2011. So, if it was just a storage room, why mark it as though someone had once stayed there? Lena started asking around. An older nurse, after some hesitation, spoke quietly.
"There was an old woman who used to stay there, no family, no real name. We just called her Agnes. She couldn't speak, but every night she knocked on the door 3 times, and on her last night, she knocked and smiled. But by morning, she was gone. No body, no explanation. Agnes's records had vanished from the system. No ID, no discharge paperwork, as if she'd never existed.
That night, Lena was on the overnight shift again. Back in Hall E, she stood in front of the unmarked door, did nothing, just stood there, silent, listening. 3 minutes, nothing. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks, clear, steady, from the inside. Lena didn't open the door. She only placed her hand on the cold wooden surface. And for the first time, she heard no one asking for help. No whispers. No moans. No, "help me." Just presence. A soul not asking to be remembered, only not to be denied. The next day, Lena wrote a small pencil note on the hallway diagram. E16, still here. She didn't erase the line that said "not in use." She just added to it. Because not all memories are meant to be exposed. Some just need to be acknowledged. In the final month of her clinical rotation, Lena began to feel tired, not physically exhausted, but worn down by not knowing what was real anymore. Every story she had written blurred the line. Was it an experience or a hallucination, a phenomenon, or the result of absorbing too many other people's fears while forgetting her own voice? One autumn night, after a 16-hour shift, Lena returned to her small rented apartment. No paintings on the wall, because she knew she wouldn't be there long. She drifted off around 7 p.m. and then she dreamed of a hallway with no exit. No light, no doors. Just shadows walking past without ever looking at her. No one cried for help. No one screamed. But Lena could feel. Every single one of them knew she was there. One shadow stopped. It had no face, no name. But when Lena looked closer, she saw herself. That figure leaned down and said, "You've listened to everyone, but you've never listened to yourself." Lena woke up with a jolt, her collar soaked in sweat. On the table, the note still read, "I have listened." But this time she flipped it over and wrote to herself, "I have listened to myself too, and I am afraid." She brought that piece of paper to work the next day and taped it to the back of her name badge. No one could read it, but it reminded her, sometimes we are the shadows, searching for someone to hear us. This state, in psychiatry, is known as emotional mirroring in nurses who care for the dying. Many student interns experience a condition called compassion fatigue, emotional exhaustion from over-empathizing. But Lena wasn't burned out. She became clearer. One day after work, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and instead of asking, "Is someone standing behind me?"
like she always did. She asked, "Is there someone within me who hasn't been heard?"
4 years after that first day, Lena returned to Hollow Pines, not as a student anymore, but as the new head nurse supervising end-of-life care. Everything seemed unchanged. The pale walls, the faint scent of antiseptic, the lonely echo of rubber soles in the hallway. But Lena was different. On her first day, she didn't check patient files, didn't stop by the admin office. She walked straight to room 303. The door was still old, the nameplate still faded, and still no one inside. She opened the door. Afternoon light filtered through the window. The bed was empty. No sound, no chill, no help me. Just a room that had grown older, along with her memories. Lena sat in the same cold metal chair she once despised. This time, she accepted the cold. And then, gently, a breeze passed through, from nowhere specific, but carrying a familiar scent, like the morning she first arrived here. Fresh laundry, peppermint tea, stillness. And after all these years, she finally heard what she never expected. "Thank you." A whisper. Not in her head, not in her ears, but deep in her chest, where fear used to live, now softened into acceptance. In palliative care literature, this is called a bereavement echo, the emotional reverberation of unresolved grief, released when the last living soul finally accepts that they have listened long enough. Lena didn't need anyone to prove it was real. As she left room 303, she wrote one last note and placed it beneath the bedsheet. "I have heard. I have remembered. Now, you may rest." That night, she didn't dream of hallways, didn't dream of whispers. She only saw a bright room, where a woman no longer looked at Lena. Some deaths leave questions, some deaths leave voices, but some just need someone willing to sit down and listen. If you've ever lost someone in silence, if you've ever stood in a room where no one answers anymore, believe this: someone, somewhere, has once heard, just like you.